would be Sean is our bold brave leader.
Okay.
Sean, are you up there in the sky?
I'm right here.
There he is.
Hi, everybody.
Hold on, gotta turn him up. Can you hear us, Sean?
I can hear you just fine, thanks.
All right.
So I think if you're the vice chair, if you want to take, just to make a brief introduction, we didn't plan this, so.
Sean, do you want me to just take over getting us into the meeting?
Yeah, why don't you do that? That'd be perfect, thanks.
Okay. Apologies for yes, no apologies. First thing on the agenda is public comments, meeting of Board of County Commissioners. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing none. Seeing none. Next, we are convening as the Clear Creek County Emergency Services General Improvement District Board of Directors. I don't know, there may be other jurisdictions who are posted for this meeting if you've got multiple members of your board here. And we are here to discuss the fire protection in the Clear Creek Fire Authority Protection District. I think what I'm gonna do is hand it over to our bold, brave facilitator. Jonathan, why don't you get us going here?
Okay. Sorry if I have my back to you all here. Good evening and good to be here again. I'll have this in display mode. Display mode on my.
Sometimes if it's weird, you might have to stop sharing and then reshare and make sure you check those boxes. I know that's really dumb, but it makes a difference.
Okay. So then.
Sorry, it's finicky sometimes. If not, I can make you send it to me and I can share it. It worked.
Look at that. Okay, here we are, Clear Creek County Fire Authority. Can't advance it.
You're right here on that.
And that's it, nor up or down.
Do you want to just send me the file? Sorry.
Can you send it to me?
Yep.
While we're working that out, maybe we should just introduce ourselves to one another. We know each other, but I'm George Marlin. I'm a county commissioner. I live in Idaho Springs.
Jeanette Peel, Town Administrator for the Town of Empire.
Wendy Cook, Mayor, Town of Empire.
Chris Fry, Town of Silver Plum Representative.
Beth Luther, Clear Creek County employee.
Megan Heiler, Public Information Officer here at Clear Creek County.
Mary Smith, Town of Georgetown, Selectman, Ward 3.
Rick Corrigan, Town Administrator for Georgetown.
Lynette Kelsey, Police Judge for Georgetown.
Chuck Harmon, Mayor of Idaho Springs.
Jim Jones, Clear Creek Fire Authority.
Aaron Crawley, EMS Director, Clear Creek EMS.
Brian Bossart, County Manager.
Kelly Davian, Clear Creek Fire.
Good, thanks, everyone.
Okay, I figured this out.
Can we hear from everyone else?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Everyone's,
James Ball, I live in Dumont. We've been watching a lot of these online, but we're here to get the real experience.
Jody Hartman Ball, I am from Vermont.
Catherine Flexing, I live here in Georgetown.
Mike Anderson, I'm on the Clear Creek Fire Authority Board, live in Idaho Springs.
I'm Jones, I'm a volunteer firefighter with Clear Creek Fire Authority.
Mark Cuccinella, retired Clear Creek Fire Authority board member, and I was on the fire department from 99 to 16 and on the EMS from 2000 to 2014.
Jacob Glenn, Shift Captain at Clear Creek Fire Authority. Robert Smith, Georgetown.
Good. So I thought today, you see on the agenda is, I've had a chance to talk with a number of you about this issue. I think when I got called by Brian, it was to ask about, and I asked the question about what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the options that are on the table? And I want to thank you all for those discussions. We'll talk a little bit about what I heard and what I think might be a way forward associated with this, based off of what I've heard. One of the things that I heard is a desire to kind of step back and say, okay, we have had these options, we have had these discussions. You've had many discussions over the years. What's the vision and strategic goal for the fire authority and fire response in Clear Creek County going forward? Imagine it's both in terms of short-term as well as long-term strategic goals. I also heard and all of the effort that went into the assessment, the mission CIT assessment, and a desire for further talking about this. And then talking about where do we go from here? So the idea here is, and you'll see it on the meeting objective, constructively identify all the issues and plans and plan for future meetings. So the idea here is to put the issues on the table. One of the things I heard loud and clear last time was a desire for separating the personal from the process and from the sort of the issues themselves. And I take that as my responsibility as a facilitator to help to do that. And so this is not a sort of an opportunity for, for talking about each other and especially in not constructive ways. You can do that if in pleasant and complimentary ways. But other than that, really sort of focusing on that and then plan for the future meeting. So I asked, there we go. I guess I just have to be patient, right?
There's a little bit of a delay.
I haven't always been known to be patient. So, what I was asking you in terms of these interviews, or what are your perspectives on the fire authority functioning and the mission CIT report? Of course, there's their operational recommendations and the governance questions. What are your view of those governance alternatives that Peter outlined last time in terms of, and I see those as 3 or 3+, which is in terms of governance. It's either status quo, you change the IGA, you move to a Title 20 or 32 special district, or you look at a county managed CID. What's the other?
CID. ESGID.
ES.
Super easy.
Okay. Not only do I not have patience, but I get an acronym. So and then the bigger what's the vision? What's the goal? Where does this go? I know from these interviews that you've had years and years and years, both experience, conversations, whether it was renewing the existing IGA, getting into that previously. And so where are we going on this? And the assumption here is that Clear Creek County, by articulating that vision, you'll be able to identify characteristics and criteria upon which you're going to evaluate those governance alternatives, right? The ones that we've just outlined. And then what are the problems we're trying to solve? So here's kind of what I heard. There's a bunch of motivations and interests. One of the strong motivations is in moving forward is a well-equipped, sustainably funded fire authority or fire response. A goal of continuity of existing fire response capability and strategically preparing for the future. We know that fire behavior, is changing. It's different than it was in the past. How do we think about that? Needing funding levels, agreed standards and level of service for the community, objective examination of those potential governance options. So not just to say, one or the other, but let's really look at those objectively. And I have a suggestion about one way we might do that in terms of the short term, as well as some of those long-term options. There's a desire to move beyond personal and organizational differences toward what are the things, and build trust and focus on the issues. That's a real challenging thing for people who have engaged with each other over many years over these topics. That's what the challenge is in front of you, and that's some of the desire. Ensure that and that all of the IGA entities have a voice in the decisions that go moving forward. And also an open mind about how you go about doing that. Fairness and representation, heard that, and that means I italicize that because it was different things for different people about what that meant. And finally, what I would say is there's an opportunity, and one of the things that I heard. This is an opportunity for Clear Creek County to create the system that will work best for Clear Creek County and to create that in a process to do so. And so that was sort of some of the interview themes that I've heard. And then it builds off of something that I use as a conceptual model in my mind, which is that groups, whether it's the fire authority or it's the entities figuring out what's the pathway forward, that if you can think about it in terms of your interests, the things that are most important to you, and they come in 3 different flavors, right? The first one is about the process. Let's have a fair process where we look at the pros, the cons of these. Let's understand how these decisions are going to be made. Those are procedural interests. And I heard a lot of those when I was talking with you all. Another one is a psychological side of the triangle, right? To be heard, respected, trusted to bring your expertise and your experiences to the table. And then finally, the substantive interests are about, what's the governance model that you're going to use? What are the asks that you're going to make in terms of to the public for whether a new authority or funding amounts or those kind of things? And where I've seen groups work really well is that when you pay attention to each other's interests in these 3 different flavors, if you will. And so I'm going to hope that you're going to talk about where Clear Creek County goes in terms of the fire response, in terms of the things that are most important to you. So when I think about interest, I think about the thing that I want to do versus the thing that I'm opposed to, right? So that's what I'm hoping that we're going to be doing, is focusing on what are the things that are most important to you. And in so doing that, we really focus on a criteria and the things that, and then your job becomes, how do we meet as many of those interests in our future fire response in Clear Creek County that we possibly can? So I'm going to get off my soapbox there for a second and say, of that summary, was there anything that surprised you, that was missing, that you think was just like, I just had earplugs in when I was talking to you and I didn't quite get it? Any thoughts there? Any surprises on sort of those issues that I heard? Okay, I'm not gonna talk at you the entire time. I promise this, but if it's good enough to keep going, go ahead.
I will confess, the bullet point in there, and I know your job is, it's not possible to we don't all agree on everything. The piece in there that says that every jurisdiction needs to continue to have a voice, I agree with the principle. And I also am starting to view it as the source of our problem when you have 29 elected officials on 5 different bodies trying to figure out how to solve the problem that we see other groups of 5 manage to solve. And so that, I'm not trying to say I don't think people should have a voice. There's a little bit of nuance there as how I'm starting to understand this problem.
So the interest, if I go back to that triangle, is to ensure that you have a governing body, an entity that is able to make decisions effectively and ensure that there's representation, but to do so in an effective way. So, and you're concerned that if all the voices, if everything, it's just very challenging to be able to make good strategic board decision. Am I getting somewhere close on that?
I think so. I mean, I think it takes a lot of time and effort to communicate in an environment that's this complex. I think a lot of folks don't have that time. I don't want to have that time. There's plenty of stuff I could be doing. So, I mean, that's just, I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't have a voice on the fire department by any means.
Yeah. And remember, this is what I heard. These are desires, which, and I heard it at your last meeting as well as in my conversations, was that you want to have a voice, and that voice may look different going forward. It may look, but there's this idea about the voice and the decisions about how you're going to move forward. I thought that was the sort of the play sandbox that we were kind of trying to figure out, which is how do we make sure that voices are represented in the future of the fire response in the county? And so what that looks like, I think there's a lot of, that's where we're gonna try to work together. Time and effort, a big one, right? You don't focus and understand and get to these, sometimes groups that I work with fall into agreement. Most of the time they're built. They're built by identifying what's important to you, the criteria, you look at the options, and I think we have a limited range of options. And then you work together to try to meet as many of those as you can, but you don't live in a perfect world. There's not a single bullet, perfect, answer to that. And so it is going to take your time and effort to kind of work through there. When Brian and I talked about sort of joining you all on this journey or ride or whatever we call it, the idea was, I don't know how long that it looks like. Some groups with a lot of trust, with a lot of, focus are able to accomplish big things in shorter amounts of time, and it goes the opposite way as well. So we'll kind of work through that, but the idea is that we would continue to meet like this approximately every couple of weeks to try to work through that. Lynette, did you have?
Yeah, what you're saying, I guess the way I would view your statement, George, was more like your vision of the solution looks different. And where we are right now, there are a lot of us that are saying we do want an actual voice. We want direct representation. So that's, kind of starting point. That's where I am anyway. So.
Yeah, just trying to point to that tension.
Yeah, I think there's two different layers to it. One of them is how to get where we're going, how to get through this process. And who has, how, in building trust, it's pretty hard to build trust without people feeling like they're heard and have a voice. So to get to determining a structure and whatever other decisions that are made in this process is one part of it. And I don't know how to do that without everyone feeling they have a voice, because otherwise you'll never develop the trust to be able to do that. And then the other one is, what does the final structure look like, and how is that voice representation there? And when we are identifying neighborhoods that are currently, for example, large neighborhoods in the unincorporated county that are very much like the towns that we have in the county, then there are thoughts about how do we make sure that those neighborhoods that have unique fire risk, for example, have a voice in the future of operation. And we're implying that we're not talking about probably a decrease in input and a voice. The question is, how does that translate into decision-making authority and stuff like that to be able to get there at the end of the day? And the first one's going to help us figure out what that second is like. And I don't know how to go there without having equal voice in the room.
Thank you. And to be really clear, I think all 29 of the elected officials that are involved in this should be participating in this meeting.
And also, and thinking about sort of where, and I like the distinction between the, sort of the process to get to a governance model that accomplishes your visions along, and that, that's why I put that each IGA entity that are, and then as we go forward, thinking about this opportunity again to create the system that best works for Clear Creek County. I mean, that has to be sort of the North Star associated with this group. And so to do that, what I'm going to suggest is a bit of a discussion. And it's at the top, it says vision. And what I want you to do, all of the IGA members, I want you to write down kind of your thoughts about a vision for a high functioning fire response in Clear Creek County. What are the characteristics? What are the criteria in this ideal world? What's happening? What's also not happening in this? And in my discussions, I heard about, staffing levels, the role of career volunteers, the infrastructure, station, apparatus, all of those kind of things. Level of service, response times, funding levels, governance mechanism, integration with emergency management services as a whole, the relationships that you all have between each other, municipalities and the county. And so what I want you to do is just take take 2 minutes, and in this ideal world, because where we go from here, this is the ideal, if you will. Then we go to mission CIT's piece about, so here's where at least this assessment suggests we are. And then we focus on where those gaps are in terms of from here to there. And so that's the idea. So take a minute or two and thinking about in your mind. And I'm gonna make sure Sean, and if there are others that join, Andy, is Andy Marsh on there, Chuck, or is it just?
He's there.
He's on.
He's there as well. So I'm gonna make sure not to forget you all that are on this, but take a couple minutes to thinking about really interested in what it is that you want to see, right? It's that interest part about not what you're against, but what is it that you want to see? And it can be sort of, the way I was thinking about this is like, think about 10 years in the future and you look back and say, this was the best conversation and opportunity, and we were able to accomplish X because of Y in terms of the fire. So I want you to think about it from the positive standpoint. This is going really well. How did we get there? What are the characteristics? What's happening? Ready, set, 2 minutes.
Why'd you come up here?
Took one for you.
2 minutes.
Just to note, there are lots of other considerations. Those are just to get you thinking. Okay. One more 30 seconds. You all must have been really good students. Especially you and Lynette. Okay, so I'm sure you have a number of things on your list. All I want is just one thing, right? I don't want to go through your entire list. We're gonna let everybody have a say. If you heard something that you had on your list already, you can deepen that, you can think more about that, but just what's your sort of the biggest sense about the vision, about an ideal, the characteristics, what's that thing, what's not going on? What do you think? Who's got one? Chris, you got one? Kick us off?
I'd like to see a plan for a higher funding for the fire authority. Short term and long term. That's something that everybody can agree on that's sustainable.
Yeah, so it's that it's a plan for both the short and the long-term funding. That's what that. I suspect a few of you might have had that on.
I would add to that also the ability to make changes to funding as needed.
Mhm. Say more about that in a minute.
Well, I'm struggling to understand how the fire authority is so bound to their original mill levy. And without the ability to change that over time, it's almost like there's a built-in obsolescence that should not be there.
So the vision, if you had it, with the constraints is that the adaptability to the funding as needed is much more responsive.
Exactly.
Okay, and this isn't one of my pieces, but what I thought of immediately was the idea that that implies having the foresight to, if we're changing funding models, to think of whatever model that is, that is more easily legally adaptable, the most easily legally adaptable. Yeah. Just building on that.
Yeah. You're not gonna take it on that one as yours. Who's got Wendy, Jeanette? You've been around fire, different structures a long time. Your vision for what would work out?
I would say a strategic training and equipment program for new as well as replacement, and the funding that would have to be built into that budgeting.
So it's this strategic training and infrastructure, or?
Okay, yeah. That's probably, well, that's as concise as you can make it. I was trying to tell you where I was aiming.
Yeah. So tell us where you're aiming with that. If you had a strategic training and the infrastructure and the funding to support it, sort of.
Okay,
where does that get you?
Going back to Mission CIT, one of the things that was discussed numerous times is levels of service and numbers of people and things like that. And that's what I was referring to in getting as close to some of these improvements and levels that are suggested as is feasible for our county and our ability to fund.
And so there's a piece in there that's adapted or context, for lack of a better word, context specific to Clear Creek County in terms of the opportunities and limitations in terms. So it's rooted here. It's not
Needs to be realistic.
Okay. Who else?
I guess it's kind of tied to what you were saying. I think when you're talking about vision, a strategic plan that is tied to measurable outcomes, because then you have highly trained professionals. If you're gonna tie in volunteers, you have a plan to train and develop them. Your funding streams are tied into that, but I think every great organization has a vision of where they want to go, and they put action steps together in a strategic overall plan. And I think that's probably the reason we're meeting.
And is that specific to fire, in terms of that strategic plan and the measurable outcomes that you can?
I believe so. And I think the department's has already been doing some things to work toward that. And I just think coming together and getting this vision, so that way you can tie those measurables to the strategic plan.
And so that's updating the strategic plan of 2019. Is that, I mean, here we are in 2024.
Yes, I think a strategic plan is also has flexibility of, unlike the mill levies that can address funding streams.
I'm hearing kind of this theme about a flexibility, adaptability to to the changing culture, climate. What else? George?
I didn't write this down. This is where my head is at right now. I think like a sense of closure, a burying of the hatchet, coming into office, trying to piece out the who says what and the history, is very difficult. And I think it prevents us from being objective. I think I'm probably as guilty of that as anyone in the room. And I think that a sense of closure, finality, we have a solution. We're not, you know, the 20 or so year debate about what this governance structure should look like is, we agree, we're happy.
So it's a supported solution that helps you to move on from talking about the past or about what it could be, but it actually has a plan that people are bought into and where the hatchet is kind of an interesting sort of piece, but there's that sort of closure and, okay. If that sort of, to me, seems like a motivating thing. Well, here's our opportunity. Here's an opportunity to kind of figure this out and sort of talking about how we go about doing that. So, what else? Sean, are you up there?
I am up here, thanks.
You have a thought? You have a thought?
Yeah, my thought was robust and timely response in any neighborhood served by the fire authority.
So that robust and timely response is in any neighborhood in Clear Creek County.
Well, served by the fire authority, not in the.
Okay, right.
In this district.
In the district.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What else?
I think that's all I have to know.
Thanks.
Might have been covered pretty well, but I think the only, what I had was too, that every one of these has been touched in some manner by the others, but I think I had resources to meet all but catastrophic events and distribution of resources for rapid response teams, and that means equipment, people. But they're organized in a manner that we can meet all but catastrophic event in timely manner, which is what. And I think that adding in that piece about there's got to be a limit to the size of the thing that we can react to. You know, like the block fire or the major wildfire event that requires outside resources, but for all but that we're ready to roll. And in a timely fashion, I agree, in every neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And so how is that different than Sean? So it's
only that there is a limit. It can't be to meet everything because there is a size of an event that can become so large that outside resources can cover it.
You remind me of a line Sean uses, not designing your church for Easter Sunday.
Or your highways for Sunday night, something like that. Chuck, us?
Well, most of my major concerns have been addressed, but one I think is important is morale. Because morale is really, that's your main thing with retaining people and being able to attract well-qualified folks, as well as even volunteers wanting to get involved. So I think it's important that it remains high.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now it is suffering.
Yeah, so in this ideal world, the morale is high. Clear Creek Fire is an attractive place to work. You're able to attract and to retain both career staff as well as volunteers. Yeah. Rick?
I guess I was just, we said it in the beginning, but it's not on the board, and I just want to I think it's important that there is representation from our communities and all of the communities that have substantial numbers. You know, like St. Mary's is not represented, and they should be represented. But I think that our community should be represented, that would have a voice and a vote.
That people feel both in word and deed that they're a part of the of the response, including in terms of decisions, right? Is that what, and when we're thinking about voice or a vote, and what are the kinds of decisions you're thinking that you want to ensure that folks are having a voice and a vote on?
Well, I just think that they would have a representative that represents them. That an actual person or two, whoever, however it's decided. I mean, we can determine these kind of things, but they would have somebody that they know represented them when it comes to making a decision.
Okay. Good.
So that's like sort of similar, maybe if we can't do equal, but similar like numbers of people that a member of a board is representing.
Yes. Yeah, just some kind of where a community feels that they have a voice and a vote. And it could be equal, it could be however it's decided, but I think everyone in this room desires that that would be secure. You know, that their voice matters, their vote matters. So.
Well,
I think the reliance, this is operational. I think the reliance should be on paid staff, not volunteers, not paid on call. We're talking career firefighters, 24/7, paid professionals, coverage throughout the county, in a perfect world.
Right, because there are cost implications of,
Hell yeah.
yeah, but so that you would have a reliance on career staff and the resources, many of these are, and the resources to support that. And can you just say a little bit more about, because, you know, we sort of understand both the, you know, volunteer, the role of career and what is the role of a volunteer and a reliance on career staff, fire response? How or where do volunteers fit into that for you?
I think we know that we can't rely on the volunteers anymore to the degree that we did 20 years ago or more, just because they aren't there. And so as we pay our police officers, as we pay our town staff, our county staff, we need to be paying our firefighters to be there Monday through Sunday, Sunday through Saturday, whatever you want to say, 24/7. That they're carrying the load, and the volunteers can come in if they're available to fill in or to fill that station when that station goes out on a call and responds out, or they're there as additional personnel if it turns out that they need to be responding. But I don't think we can have a reliance on someone who may or may not have that desire and ability and that training to do it. And we hear that, you know, the training is outrageous for some of our volunteers, some of the people who want to, but we're still responsible for providing that training. So in order to have a professional fire department, we need to be paying our personnel to do that. And that allows them to fulfill all those roles within the department that we've talked about. The fire marshal, the inspections, the wildfire response. That goes back and covers every one of these other pieces that we're listing here. We can't be robust and timely responding if we don't have the people, we don't have those paid people to be in the station ready to roll.
Thank you. Andy, Marsh, thoughts on that?
Yes, I think there's a huge opportunity to continue a very robust combination system in our county. We have a number of stations that have living units. And I think this is a desirable place to live. And if we can provide housing in return for volunteers providing a certain amount of service and getting the training. And I realize that often the cycle is that you have folks who want the training, they want the experience, and they may move on after a number of years. But if you can get several years of service, 4 or 5 years maybe, it adds tremendous depth. I certainly agree that we need an adequate core full-time staff. There's no question about it. We've gotten to that point. But I think the nature of fire incidents is that there are times when you need all hands on deck and you need that depth, and we'll never be able to fully staff for any kind of incident that happens in Clear Creek County, but we certainly, by being aggressive with our volunteer recruitment, by offering the training, one thing that really pleases me is to see the training that's occurring with Red Rocks at the new training facility there. That's really what will generate interest in volunteering and providing service. Having that facility there to continue to attract interest in the service. So I do think that we can never afford a fully paid department, but we really need to focus on and we've used the word before, but robust combination department. And I think we have the perfect opportunity to do that. The last study that we just did, the CIT study, was, there's a whole section on volunteer recruitment. They even had a person who was assigned to look at that. The other thing I might say on funding is I think the vision needs to focus on a funding mechanism, whatever we come up with, that adequately distributes the burden, not just on property owners, but on the visitors. So that gets back to some sort of hybrid funding mechanism. I think that's really important because of the huge impact that the traveling public has on Clear Creek County and the visitation, the tourism, that's only going to increase. So I think we need to figure out a funding mechanism that's probably a hybrid between mill levy and sales tax and maybe other types of funding.
Yeah. So, Andy, thanks. That was more than one, but we'll take it
Sorry.
on the back end of that. But yeah, really important. And I think we talked about this, which is that, an ability, the vision is about a funding for that isn't all on the backs of Clear Creek County folks, given the impact that visitors, the I-70 play on that, whether that's a sales tax and of course that was discussed or is being discussed in SB 194 as in the Title 32 piece, but that funding mechanism, whatever that is it really is able to capture and mitigate the impact or the burden on Clear Creek County and having that on for those who are impacting your emergency services and your fire responses. Now that did everybody get at least one out? Okay, what else? What do we miss?
I have a question.
Please.
What about an open, effective communication between the public that we know what to do when we have an emergency?
Okay.
It's in place and we all know it and it's communicated in more than one way.
Right, so it's a fire response that the public is aware of, that they can communicate with directly in terms of in order to enable this robust and timely response, but having an informed public that really knows how to access that and when and where and what to expect, presumably as well. Yeah. What else?
Thank you for jumping in. If you're on the edge of the room, please feel free to speak.
What about what's not happening? What's not going on? If you think about the 10, 20 years of thinking about the structure for fire in Clear Creek County, what's not happening in this ideal world of yours? What are the things that you don't do?
What are we missing? Is that the question?
Yeah, could be what you're missing, what you want to avoid, what you don't want to have happen. I heard it in the interviews. Don't want to see your IGA or whatever governing authority lapse or have uncertainty associated with that. I mean, that's one of the things, just as to prime the pump. What is it that you don't want? Sometimes, we're talking about the vision. Sometimes we get clear about that when thinking about what it is that we don't want. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with your statement about the IGA continuing. But even in the first discussion, the representation, these people are going to be asked across the board to foot this bill, the majority of it. We're gonna spread it out wherever else we can get money, but the point is, they're being asked to pay a bill that they may or may not have representation
Right.
to have a say in. I don't agree with that.
Right, so what you do, yeah, you don't want to have, it's the opposite of what we talked about. The ability that if you're funding, if you're part of it, that you have an ability to influence the overall direction of the governance or the structure, not the individual responses necessarily.
Correct.
But in terms of the kinds of decisions, the strategic decisions, if you will.
So it's like equal influence no matter where you live, right?
It's input no matter where you live. I don't know, I didn't necessarily mean just influence everything, but you need to have a say and be present at the table.
Right, and I think one of the things that I'm aware of is that in this structure, existing IGA with your 29 elected officials, that's a challenge. So you have this influence and you also have, I think what George raised earlier is efficiency and about how do you make best decisions related to that? And what's the role both of the public and broadly those who are contributing to, and so, I've seen in differing models about how that can look. But what else is on your mind about the things you want to avoid in this idealized world? Yeah.
No loss of the medical outcomes that we're seeing. I don't want to set expectations too high. I heard you when you said 52% was an anomaly. But 25%, we've done it for 3 years.
Thank you for voicing what I was just thinking.
One thing I think going back to right before that, talking about the voice and the influence, one of the things that happens on elected bodies is there's a continual rollover and loss of institutional knowledge, governance knowledge of how things function. And when you bring that down to too small of a group, when you concentrate that too much, you can have a sudden great loss of institutional knowledge to be able to effectively govern in a consistent way an operation that's serving a wide range of people and entities. And so whatever structure we land on should be one in which there's a perpetuation of the institutional knowledge of how we're governing this and what our relationships are, how we work. If you come down to I'm just going to say it, I'm going to, maybe the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but if you come down to too small of a governing body that can, 2/3 of that governing body can turn over like that, you have one person left that is experienced in the relationship and is making governance. And by spreading that institutional knowledge, you have both built trust and the ability to have a continuity of experience remaining on the board.
That's not exactly a hypothetical, is it?
No, not exactly.
Others? Sean, Andy?
I think to me, some of the challenges is to make sure that we don't lose the perspective that each one of our communities is unique. Like it's easy to say, hey, let's do this system, but without realizing that that's not going to work very well because our communities are all so different. And I just think that we need to lean into that, making sure that, I think that's why I like, there is a representation, because if that person's not communicating that uniqueness about their community, it could be missed. And then we're not gonna have the outcomes that we're projecting right now, saying, we don't want to see any homes burned or lives lost. Like that could be our standard. But to get there, it's gonna be challenging because each one of our communities is radically different. And it's gonna need different needs and services to provide the expectations to meet that. So that was just a challenge, because it's like, wow, I don't think I have not thought like that before. You know, it's like, oh, let's just have 5 members. Well, that doesn't necessarily meet what we're trying to do, because they're just different.
We talked about not losing the diminishing the EMS effectiveness and saw the statistics last time and the amazing job you're doing. What is the relationship with EMS and the future fire? Kelly?
We have a very strong relationship with EMS. We are an integral part of their success, which hasn't been spoken yet. I think that the challenge of all this is that the funding is the biggest issue. There's a lot of challenge there to inform everybody, even everybody in this room, as to what we are currently doing and achieving and how well we are doing our job. And that I don't think there's anything missing other than money at this point right now. And I would challenge anybody in here to prove otherwise.
Right, and so this is kind of one of the dynamics that I see, right, in terms of that this can become really defensive, and it's why I wanted to start about the vision, right? So what you want to see, Kelly, if I'm hearing it right, is that EMS and fire are strong, integral parts of each other and support each other in that way, right?
Yes.
So that again is that's what we're trying to think about. It's not a judgment on, we're gonna get here in a few minutes about, Mission CIT's organizational assessment, but in this moment, we're free to think about the world in which we want to do this, that the characteristics of this dynamic. What I've heard as well is that it's integrated, and supportive, not diminutive. It doesn't diminish the impact of either one, but in fact does the opposite, accelerates it and amplifies it. What else? Authority members.
I just want to pile on with what Kelly was saying. I think a real heavy lift is going to be letting the public just generally know about how vulnerable they are right now. A lot of folks, unless their house is on fire, can't appreciate the fact that maybe it's a 30-minute response time to certain areas. And we're not asking them to support a 20 or 30% increase. We're probably only paying about 1/3 of where we ought to be. And so I'm just saying this is a very major outreach and education we're going to have to embark on, because we got to get them on our side.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I mentioned that part of my work is on the Floyd Hill project, and in terms of the fire risk associated with the construction of that project, especially with the Marshall fire that happened during that planning process, the Maui wind-driven events, all of those kind of things, and for an understanding of the risk facing residents in Clear Creek County and the importance of funding it, right? I mean, that's kind of what about which okay. What else? Chris, did you have anything else on that list?
Not there.
Okay, so I think this has been really helpful, and what I'll do is maybe put a cap on this visioning part and start to think about, when in my discussions, I wanted to talk about some of the mission, provide time to talk about more about the organizational assessment and mission CIT recommendations. I know that these touch on some really sore spots for folks. But if we go back to my agenda slide or my objective slide, it was, maybe I can't go back, is that we want to have, we want to surface all of the issues and then think about a plan for addressing them. And so I thought we would take a break, but we're only going till 8 o'clock. Can we just keep rolling, or is that all right to just keep rolling?
Good.
Yeah,
Would you all indulge me to add one thing to the
yeah,
the future looks like? Just a feeling of safety, seeing our responders.
Thanks, Linda.
Who second that? Is somebody? So you'll see a little bit later the sort of the format that I'm hoping to take a look at as we come back to those governance and funding options. And that when we come back next time, I'm gonna take these, probably kind of massage them a little bit and have them in the form of an evaluation matrix to say, of these governance alternatives and with, opportunities for hybrid models, which of them then answer these kind of questions, provide for that. And I'll send that out to you in advance, and you'll see this as kind of criteria. I'm not asking you to agree to all of these. It would be useful to know if you disagree with any of this vision that of your fellow partners here on here. Is there anything that you would say, you know what? In terms of thinking about moving forward, this is a vision that that I agree with, or is there something on here that you object to, anyone? Is there any part of this? Is this just motherhood now, apple pie? We get a chance to dream once in a while. And what we'll get to is okay, which ones of these can we do? How well does this alternative provide for an adaptable funding mechanism or a hybrid funding mechanism, as Andy talked about in that regard? Okay, so
I got a question. I try to look at the why and what are the barriers to coming up with a governance system that represents folks where everybody has a voice? And what are the barriers for the funding stream? Because it seems to me you need to be specific about those barriers so that way you can address them.
yeah, and I think that my idea was that in that matrix, we can talk about both sort of the barriers as well as sort of the things that these would accomplish, how well these would do, and what might get in the way of us doing that, because that's sort of the reality testing about, before we do that. So I think for sure that we'll put that on the board to make sure that we incorporate in that sort of the barriers. But my thought is right now that we just were sort of wanting to tee up kind of the things that you'll see in a matrix kind of a evaluation method to say, let's do a fair look at these. How well do these governance mechanisms potentially do this? And I know that some of you have a preference for the status quo. Some of you have a preference for change. Others of you are intrigued by Title 32 in the special district, and we're gonna get there, and that's great. I'm glad you have those perspectives, but let's just do that with some criteria, and if there are other thoughts that come to mind after I massage it, but we won't lose sight of what are the inhibiting factors? What are the things that
The solutions that you put in the matrix will actually give options to get around or overcome those barriers, right?
Yeah. Yep. I'm not trying to make this thing out to be more than what it is, because, my sense is that keep it simple, right? I mean, presumably, one of your vision for this, for an effective response is that it's not it's not complex as well. You don't have to, that there's continuity, that there's a familiarity from the public and from you all about what those standards are, what you're measuring them up by, and all of that. But we'll make sure to get to the barriers. Okay, so has everybody had a chance to read all 100 recommendations? One of the I have, but I haven't memorized them all. Chief, you went through those line by line for some of those. What I heard in our discussions were that as we're looking toward the governance model, as we're looking toward a flexible, adaptable funding mechanism that provides this, robust was used many times. We might get specific about next time about what robust looks like and what those standards are. But I know a number of you had strong reactions to it. Folks wrote letters to that effect about this. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that the key recommendations from your opinion that impact your thinking, and I, the way I looked at those are operational and governance, funding, and then the questions and concerns that you have regarding the assessment recommendation. So that's really what this time in the agenda was geared to do. And I'm gonna kind of sit myself down and want to hear the opportunity that, for you to talk about. And it's useful when you're doing this to point to the specific number or recommendation that you're having. So if you need to, just take a moment to take a look at the document itself. And, Wendy and Jeanette, I'm not gonna pick on you, but you did, you're the most
Yes, you
specific
are.
comments related to, yeah, anybody want a copy?
Mine's in the car.
We have the condensed one.
He's got extras.
That's the operational assessment, and then I,
Yeah.
recommendation breakout. That helps.
Thank you so much.
I'm famous for tripping over wires and kind of.
There's plenty of them there.
So just take a minute. And maybe if you need to use stretch break or whatever, it will take literally a minute to keep. And then the recommendations, the executive summary. We have the governance piece on there. Wendy and Jeanette, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, yeah.
Again,
Sure.
this is in the spirit of the thing that I care about. And, I recognize that every assessment like this, it raises issues, it raises concerns. We want to know what those are related to this and discuss them. So, you want to start?
I don't mind. We had put together a letter that encompassed comments from our board after they had heard a couple of meetings, a couple of presentations. So the things that we talked about, we're not actually addressing individual recommendations in the report. It was more about, it did feel like the report said everything was bad and we disagreed with that, or the entire group. That's, the entire board and staff members, and that was a compilation of all of those comments. So a lot of the things that we're putting out that, we want to make sure we do this. And from our discussions, my first thought on every one of them is, have we actually identified that that's a problem? We haven't focused on what's been done well, and we have been very happy with the fire authority. So I appreciate Kelly saying, you haven't really focused on what we've done well. If an outsider came and listened to this, it would sound like we've had massive failures. So that's what members of the community in Empire are feeling. And so, yeah, there's a lot of recommendations. Everything could always be improved. We know that. So we're not trying to dig our heels in. We're simply trying to say, wow, is every one of these things failing and we have to make drastic changes to fix it? Or do we just need a few more people and a little more money? Those two opinions are very far apart. So that's really what our letter was focusing on. That as a community, we're not unhappy, but we recognize it's going to start costing more money. But we want to make sure we have quality over quantity. So, yeah, the recommendations are great, but if it creates a wish list that we can never afford, we're not going to be able to pay our part. So we want to make sure that we're looking at quality and making sure it fits with Clear Creek County, and not this list that would be perfect, pie in the sky. Yes, we'd like to have twice as many as is recommended. That we want to make sure it's realistic, because that's really hard for our tiny little town to be able to keep up with everybody else.
So that kind of reinforces something you said about the vision earlier, which is that it's realistic, it's context specific, and the way in which at least your community read some of these was recognizing that can always improve, that felt it was skewed toward that to the negatives. And so I'm looking at the page 2, there's 2 recommendations, basically, 2 big ones, which is the biggest challenge facing effective funding is the continued effective funding. Sounds like that there's agreement on that, right? We talked about it in terms of the vision. It's really about was about the governance structure, in some ways about you all, right? That they had an issue with that needs to be addressed, not only to help with the funding, but also long-term vision, planning, and leadership of the department. Is that where that sentiment was coming from? Because it sounds like the first biggest recommendation, pretty much everyone's in agreement with. There needs to be more funding here, but it's tied to these other things.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm putting you
that's
right on
okay. Because I am trying to, pull together conversations from, about 10 people around the table. So it's not just one of us, it is a feeling around the table, but I can certainly hand it off if you want to jump in on that.
No, I think you stated it quite well.
Okay. Other thoughts on this? The governance structure was, maybe, and we are going to talk about this. It had some immediate needs in terms of a long-term financial plan, improving the governance structure to provide for more effective communication and planning oversight to CCFA, and then increasing staffing. Right, those were the recommendations. Most immediate needs, the biggest ones, and those immediate needs. We're not going to go into all 100 of those, but let's have a discussion about that. I heard at the last meeting that from a context perspective, some of the standards, the federal standards based off of the ability to might not be accurate, or maybe I read that in I know Springs's letter. But what are your thoughts? What let's put this on the table now, because we want to move on to like, what are we going to do? So if this was the vision, this was one version of where you are today, right? And then where are we going to go from there, Randy?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point but it speaks to where we started the meeting, which is we're here to talk about stuff, not failure, not people so much, but the stuff that needs to be done. And if we do acknowledge that the report points out that to meet certain levels of response, as Chuck said, we could need to triple the amount of money somewhere, and to describe that as undoable is, I agree, it's difficult, but it also means that there must be something you're spending it on. And so to justify and figure out what it is we need to spend, and to justify that, we need to have a list of the improvements that we can make, the things where we are falling short. And so we do need to focus on the negatives in order to create the wish list, if you will, and then winnow that wish list down to the reality of what we might be able to afford. So when I read this, I don't read it as everything's wrong. I read it as these are the things that can be made better. And these are the justifications for why we do think it takes more money to accomplish all of that. And it's not an attack on Clear Creek County, or an attack on the fire district, or the fire authority, or attack on an individual person. It's that these are some things that can be made better. And I think we have agreement from the fire authority management, because they're working on some of those recommendations.
Right, we saw the long list of them.
Right, and it's a wish list, and we may not get it all done, but there has to be a justification. When we go to tell the public, what's the risk? What is this thing you need? Why do we need more money? Well, it's because of these reasons. This is the list of the reasons why we need more money. Maybe we can't afford all of it, but it's the basis of the establishing who we want to be in the future. So just focusing on what's right doesn't take us to what we need to fix, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, and so, in terms of assessments, audits, you name it, that's their job in some ways. And I think the part of it is why we're having this, to raise these things, to surface those. And it's your job as policymakers in terms of governance to really understand, take it, and determine kind of what best way to do it. But I guess what I'm hearing Randy say is that that was sort of the orientation of this was around identifying those areas for improvement. So, Chuck.
Well, we are being proactive on some of these things. I'll give you an example. We are, at least for now, putting on the back burner, a new fire station being built in Idaho Springs. And they are, actively, having some additional accommodations in the existing building, which can certainly save a lot of dough and put off, what's probably an $8 million expense for later, and we'll be able to staff well out of Idaho Springs. Our equipment is good. I know the recommendation is, like 10 years on equipment, but we're fortunate that ours is in pretty good shape. And the other thing I want to point out too, in all fairness, the visitors do put quite a bit of burden on our services. And I'll give you an example, just 0.4 cents of sales tax. So I don't think that's a deal breaker for visitors, at least in Idaho Springs. 0.4 cents of sales tax brings in 400 Gs just from little Idaho Springs. So I'm just saying that there's a real bright spot. I think we can probably get to the funding that where we need to go, as long as we can bring our voter base, our citizens along with us to support that. And this would be a way for the visitors to help pay for some of this.
And you guys know, I just heard, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago from a prospective tenant, what they're doing in Vail and Aspen. They have the snow gate down when you want to come into that town. And then they have a little booth and they are charging people.
Did you say that's in the Vail now?
Yeah, that's what I was told. I was also told they take camera pictures of their license plates and their vehicle. They question the people to ask them, why are they here today and how long do they plan to be there? Do they have a lodging they're staying in overnight, or are they gonna end up in a parking lot? The cops go around and tell people to move on down the road when it's dark and it's nighttime, and people are gonna be spending the night in vehicles somewhere and not using public facilities properly. The filth and everything's just so out of control now, and
Yep.
I understand that there's people that don't agree with those kinds of actions, but I would bet they're kind of desperate in some ways.
Yeah, and I mean, so the way I understand it is that really kind of looking at this mission CIT report, and the funding opportunities that might be there, whether that's from increased sales tax, building support amongst the community to as a whole to support that, kind of goes back to maybe a comment or made earlier, which is about clarity with the public and communication and building that broad support. My assumption is that to the extent that you all can move past some of the past that and move toward a governance and a structure that works for you, that's I'm assuming it's a prerequisite for being able to bring on the support of the broader community to pass initiatives, right? I mean, there's a relationship there between, the controversy and confidence and where you're going and the ability to fund something like this. So, let's keep going. What else do we need to say about Mission CIT before we move on to I didn't want to shortchange the discussion and move to, let's start evaluating these governance options and but anything else either in, support things that resonated most with you? Go ahead, George.
Yeah, there are, I think, 3 that have really changed the way I think about this situation. First was opening up of part of this is legislative and part of this is in Mission CIT. The opening up of opportunity to get sales tax into the mix has fundamentally changed what I think about this situation.
Because you can engage and visitors can help to share the burden in terms of response, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's just helped me frankly feel reasonable about higher aspirations. The other one is a recommendation on page 103 about communications. And this is redundant because I've already brought it up, but the problem they find is this is a complex communication environment. I don't agree with their solution that the fire authority staff should make semi-annual presentations to all 5 jurisdictions. I actually think the solution is that all 5 jurisdictions find a way and a time to come together. At least. But that has impacted my thinking and just got me like asking myself why I struggle to behave well in this system and what it is that's frustrating me. And, you know, it's not the humans, you know what I mean?
It's not the what?
It's not the humans, right? It's not the people. It's the complex communications environment.
And what does that mean to you, the complex communication environment? I think I know what they meant. What's complex about it? Is it the mountains? Is it in the, is it weather? Is it the systems? Is it the history? Like what's complex about the communication?
Just the not only the number of people, because it's not one board of 29. It's 5 boards that sum up to 29. And my board is a board of 3. We struggle to get on the same page. Jeanette just described how hard it is to get her board on the same page. If we've got 5 organizations that are struggling to take the time to go through the work to get on the same page themselves, and then somehow get those 5 organizations to get on the same page, and that's obviously involves a change to what each of those organizations thought. So then you have to shuttle back, and you're shuttling back and forth. Conversation. I have not seen this conversation. Like if you think about waves flowing around in a bathtub, like I just haven't seen those waves meet in a way that works. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing that just frankly floored me, Mike Anderson brought this up first years ago, and we all kind of laughed at him about the idea that the county should run this thing. I kind of dismissed it out of hand and was shocked that not just that they felt it was viable, but that they thought it was preferable.
Right, and I know that has been a big topic here in terms of the viability and the ability to run this system through the county and the benefits of HR and other systems that could potentially accrue. Yeah. Okay. Others, Andy and Sean, I know you're up on the screen here, but others in the room.
I'm curious how the consultants decided that there was ineffective communication between the board and staff. There's no strategic oversight. The fire chief, curious about that, because I have a strategic plan. We have a very healthy reserve fund. We're doing all kinds of incredible stuff with our operations. We're debt free. We have a very strong capital assets, buildings, some of the buildings need a little work, but that's just normal maintenance. So I'm curious why they think that the current governance is ineffective with all of and I'll go back to it, we're doing a lot of good stuff. And why is that an ineffective governance if all that stuff's happening? I don't understand that.
Can I jump in? What Kelly is saying kind of hit me too, because as I'm reading this report and thinking back on what I know is actually happening, and we've also gotten a lot of feedback from the fire authority that some of the conclusions that were drawn by Mission CIT I'm not sure where they got them. And to me, that points out how complex communication actually is. They went around, the Mission CIT folks went around and interviewed people, asked them, you know, what would you change? What's the problem? What are solutions? And their conclusions don't fit what was actually reality, in all cases. They pointed out deficiencies that weren't actually deficiencies. They were either inaction or they'd been achieved. I'm not sure why they didn't perceive that. I guess I'm gonna go back to one that I knew very well, and I told you about it, was their assumption that because the county had not adopted the wildland urban interface code, that there was no equivalent. And my experience in the building department, it's actually, we had a wildfire mitigation plan and program before WUI was ever created. So, and the point system's working very well. It's been going since January of 1996. I don't understand how they didn't pick that up. That's just one huge glaring miscommunication there. But it also creates skepticism in me that they really researched as thoroughly as they could have. And as an IGA member, it's like, okay, so now we have to figure out where they were spot on and where they were not, and try and give them, I don't know if giving them benefit of the doubt is the right phrase, but you know, their intent was to make suggestions for improvement. And so now I'm having to go beyond my skepticism that is based on things that I know that they missed, and try and give them more credit for what they did hit on. And I don't know, it just, it creates,
Uncertainty in the outcome?
well, so if they're basing their recommendations on information that they either missed, they were told, but it didn't stick, or they misunderstood, because we're all human and I say one thing thinking it's being understood the way I intend, and it doesn't always happen. So we have to get past that, so that we have to get past the point of finding, sort of trashing the entire study because we found things that were not accurate, they were in error, they're not really spot on. There are recommendations that are valuable in here. And I guess, so part of the process here, as I see it, is trying to take the value out of the report that exists and not hold on to resentment for the things that they missed. So.
And so the value, Lynette, just to stay on that for a moment, which is, you know, and is the funding is the biggest challenge. It did talk, you know, about governance structure, the governance piece. And, you know, you've heard Kelly say sort of some of pushback on that one. And then, you know, there's these specific pieces about financial plan, the improving governance, increasing staffing to minimum levels. If those were the high level takeaways, do those resonate with, and I'm just kind of looking around. So like, you know, I get it that, you know, there are certain pieces that that may not have matched, and it's a, you know, they're, you know, may have missed one aspect or the other, and that gives you pause about some of the other pieces, and I guess I wonder about the value of their main takeaways associated with that.
I think it's a legitimate thing that Lynette brought up, that I'd like to offer a counterpoint to it. And that is that they may have, you know, Mission CIT may have responded with their own biases and their own boilerplate. But, you know, it would be like saying they haven't adopted the 2018 or 21 building code as an example, when we've got a perfectly good building code from 1996 or 97. Our understanding of building technology and strategies has changed in that amount of time in that arena. It's also changed, is my understanding. I'm not a professional firefighter, but the environment is changing in two ways. And that is the actual environment itself is changing, and it's changing how we're viewing wildland urban interface. And at the same time, our science is continually increasing about what we know helps and is making a difference as we're observing things like the Marshall Fire. And so the codes are changing. And so, you know, it might be a bridge too far to try to adopt everything that they would recommend that we adopt, but we should be as open-minded to understanding. We should make sure to question ourselves as hard as we question the report when the report disagrees with us. Because our own understanding, if it's based on something that's 30 years old, might not be reflecting the latest understanding of how to do it, how to take care of ourselves, how to build a good building, how to protect a building against fire. And I'm not saying that as a fire expert or a fire professional at all. I have no knowledge there, but I know if I'm looking at building codes, you know, we threw away the 96, 97 building codes a long time ago. And I'm guessing that fire codes are similar, as the environment within which fire happens is changing too.
Yeah.
Jonathan, can I just say one thing? As the person who helped them coordinate this report, the draft went out to every single entity around this table. Every single entity around this table had the opportunity to comment on the draft and offer up what they thought there were errors. Let's just say not every single entity around this table chose to do that. So we may find some things in here that aren't accurate.
Right.
Because some just chose not to comment on the draft.
Can I build on that?
Sure.
Because in addition to commenting on the draft, it's, you know, they're basically regurgitating the information we give them. They're analyzing it, regurgitating it back to us, right? And the interesting piece of this one error in the report is that it would have been Clear Creek County that said not adopted is not technically accurate. And so that's something that we missed.
But I responded to it.
And I know we responded to it, and I know we didn't catch everything, and I mean, the dangerous question that I want to bring into this room is this evidence that we're not paying enough attention to this responsibility as like all of us?
By not having and catching various pieces and, you know, and so, you know, I think that's a good question. I think that the part where I would like us to focus is, so what of these do we advance, right? In terms of, and that's why I keep coming back to this, we're gonna have a governance discussion, right? We're gonna have a way of thinking about how and which of these options can your vision be best realized, right? You know, are there things that at this point in time that you just want to and there was an opportunity before, but maybe, there was another opportunity, at least for this group, as we're starting to consider, how do we go forward? What do you want to make sure that you put on the table, and just to clarify, and at the same time to say, you know, this report has value, and it makes some things that you as a board can choose to advance. We are going to advance the governance discussion. That's one of them. We know the governance and the funding are major components of, and they're linked with each other. The opportunity, as George and others have mentioned, around the sales tax opportunity. But But so those are the big ones. And so I don't want us to continue to talk about flaws I want us, to me, this is your time, but focusing on the future about where you're going, what can you take of this? And the big ones there were around governance and about funding and about some of those steps. And I guess that's where I was hoping at the end of this conversation to say, can we move forward with those, recognizing there might have been some oversight, recognizing that some of you could have spent some more time on the document, those kind of things, that kind of stuff. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think for me, is I'm listening to the conversation and I know that we have lots of different representations in this room. And I think all of our boards have just come to the same conclusions that your board did, when we met and discussed this. But I think though, for my understanding of seeing the value in it, I think the value of I think it's a no-brainer. We all understand that the funding is the most critical part of this. I think the part that rubs me personally wrong is that the justification to go to governance should be that then. If we're gonna be honest where we can agree, it's the funding is a real reason, not that there's a fundamental issue of long-term vision, planning, and leadership. Because I think that that's an incorrect premise that they state really firm. Because I think everyone in this room, except for the county, would argue that. But I would say that the premise is that we all agree on, or the value in this is that the funding should force us to look at a governance to say, will that meet it? What were expectations of what were our visions and goals of this? Is that governance going to meet that? Now and I would say I can rest on that because I don't agree with the others either. Because I would say, I don't think any of the municipalities would agree on that one, but we would agree on the fundamental principle for the beginning.
Rick, it would be really helpful to me if you would try to avoid speaking for more than yourself.
Right.
You're speaking not only for Georgetown, but for 3 municipalities that you're not employed by. And I think this conversation could be healthier if you avoid that.
So I think in characterizing what the county thinks, you just spoke for us to and put words in our mouth.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to speak for your organization and not for others. But what I hear, George or Rick, is that funding is an area that you can agree on, and you got challenges around the governance structure and that recommendation about that. And yet, what I hear in terms of some of the vision for where you want to go incorporates some of those things about looking at long-term planning, particularly related to funding, strategic training, and those kind of things. And so I wonder again, in terms of we are going to have the funding and governance discussion. We're going to look at all of those options. And, from what I've heard, there's preferences for certain options over others in this room. It would be helpful for all of us going forward, one, to depersonalize it and to speak for your own organization, because that's just what you know. So I saw you bristle over here, Randy. What do you want to say?
Bristle to me is that I don't like hearing from somebody that everyone in the room gets it, but the county. That's, I wouldn't say that about any organization in this room. As a matter of fact, I think I've been saying the opposite about that the whole time. And so I'm sorry, I want us to be able to talk, but if we're going to sit out here and throw bombs at other people in the room, when you start out that way, Rick, when you start out saying that we're the only stupid ones or we're the only assholes in the room, without saying those words, but implying them, it makes it really hard to have a decent conversation. I'm trying to be decent to everyone in the room right now, and I'd appreciate it if you would not speak for me.
So let's keep going. I hear you, right? And maybe that's what we can.
I know it's counterproductive what I just did. It's completely opposite of what I want to do in this room. But it's.
No, I get it. I
mean,
these are tough. I saw it last meeting. I read meeting notes. I've looked at some videos as well of previous stuff. This is not easy thing to do, is to put these, because they touch on things that are really important to you. But I do think it would be helpful if we can, at least with my participation here, is to focus on speaking for yourself. And so what I hear though is from Georgetown's perspective, Rick, that, you know, funding, support of, you're challenged with the governance piece, that you don't see the report, you don't see the recommendations as necessarily from Georgetown as a governance reform or piece that as sort of outlined here. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I'm saying that the governance piece is justified when we look at funding completely. The other two were not valid.
Okay. The governance, not the long-term vision, planning and leadership.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
If-
A couple, so, go
If I
ahead.
may, Idaho Springs, I can tell you, we thought this was a good report. And I'm saying on a bright spot, some of these communities are already being proactive and are already implementing some of these. I happen to know that Georgetown intends on increasing their contribution, doubling it over 3 years. Idaho Springs have proactively just stepped forward, and our contribution has been bumped from 141,000 to 275,000. We acknowledge that more money needs to be brought to the table. And that's why we were looking at the possibility, and I do just want to stress the possibility of sales tax, because I don't think we get there on mills alone. At least for now, shelving a new fire station in Idaho Springs. Yet one thing that was recommended in here was the potential of revamping the existing firehouse. It's already underway. So I'm just saying that, you know, there really are some very bright spots in here that we've, in some cases, we've already started to take action on. So it's really a good document.
And I know, Jeremy, you outlined sort of the status of sort of from, you know, fire department about how you're working through there. So that's helpful to know from Idaho Springs in terms of the recommendations, Wendy.
I just wanted to state that if you've studied human behavior at all, you quickly realize everybody comes at this with their own set of filters.
Yeah.
So we need to individually step back and say, do I feel this way because the facts support that, or because of the other two, the psychological, or so what Rick was saying was what he felt. And what George was saying is what he felt. But you also have to say, okay, is that what we're trying to accomplish? Can I come at an outcome or at least an opinion in another manner and realize that I might be biased this way? And so we need to think about how we're thinking. Does that make sense?
I agree with that. And I think I want to add a clarification to what I said a moment ago as an example. When it comes to the governance model, I haven't made up my mind at all about that. So when somebody is saying the county wants to do this, I'm in this room because there's only one thing I know for sure, which is the governance model is the most critical piece of the governance model. I agree with Rick, is going to be the piece about how are we able to fund this thing going forward. And I do think it has to be a governance model in which we can build trust. Otherwise, I haven't made up my mind whether an ESGID or a Title 32 or any of these things is the right thing until we go through this process and talk. And just so you also know, to qualify me a little bit, because I responded pretty abruptly a little bit ago, but it's about somebody trying to speak for me and characterize me and apply their filters to me and say, this is what I think. And that's what we can't do in the room.
Yes.
And when you saw me shaking my head afterwards, it wasn't because I was still shaking my head in anger. I was shaking my head about myself going, there you go again. What I just did, responding in the room, which is not productive either. So just so you know.
I didn't take it personally.
Okay, good.
I didn't. We're in a place where you should be comfortable to communicate ideas. And if I misspoke, I apologize. It wasn't my intention to misspeak.
Okay. I know that Andy and Sean, you haven't had a chance. I do want to sort of wrap up our discussion about Mission CIT. I think getting a sense about, I think we have have agreement on where we want to focus, which is the governance and funding issues associated with those. We'll be able to sort of advance those, recognize that there's a number of lessons, and I've been involved with a lot of assessments, many of which it's like like there's elements that are really important and you want to take away from those, and others that may not have hit the mark, and that's just part of that. Andy and Sean. And then I'm hoping that we can talk about my thought about how we move forward on the governance and funding issues. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Sean. I've been really kind of pleased to hear the tone of the conversation. Not that it got a little sharp just a second ago, but people are bringing up great points, and it's an open flow of conversation. I think you're doing a great job of facilitating the conversation, and I don't really feel like I needed to add anything. I think people have heard from me plenty in the past, and I think we're making progress.
Yeah. Okay. Andy?
One thing I might add, I think I heard you asking about specific recommendations in the report that are important. And we've talked a lot about operations and funding, and that clearly is important. But I think more can be done with community risk reduction. And that is trying to prevent fires, trying to prevent bad things from happening as much as we can. And this gets back to the recommendation in the report to hiring a full-time fire marshal. I think that that's an area that I think that because of the limited staffing, full-time staffing, the focus has to be on operations, and it hasn't been as much as ideally you would have in prevention through regular inspections, through I know there's been some mitigation with wildland, and that's important. But I think that's an area that often gets overlooked, or that's the first to get cut because you focus on operations and your response. But I mean, I think about what the county did many years ago with requiring that structures over a certain size be sprinklered out in rural areas, because at the time, and probably even today, there are a lot of areas where, if a fire gets started, you're not going to get a response there quick enough. And you need a sprinkler system, particularly in larger structures, to at least get the fire in check until the fire response can get there and finish the job. So I think let's also keep that in mind, that's a very important aspect to fire services is community risk reduction. And again, we've made a lot of headway in that area, but I think more can be done, and I think the report reflected that.
Okay, thank you.
The way I try to have tried to triage these things is say, funding and governance is this group. Operations should be the fire authority board's role. This is the appropriate time to observe part of this dynamic that is frustrating if you're on the fire authority board. Is that you don't really, you're not treated like you have much. Whenever the conversation gets difficult, it expands. And that's because I've been in the meetings when we've been discussing the IGA, and then it's been announced that actually jurisdictions are going to discuss the IGA. I don't want to ramble on that too much. So I think the vast majority of the operations conversations should happen on that board. I think the high level stuff, like, do we need a fire marshal? What are the standards we're asking them to get to? I think that this group, one of those standards needs to be with respect to safety. And those are the things that I think can be pulled out of, I don't even know if those are operations, but those are some of the high level things that I think need to be pulled into the governance and funding piece of the conversation.
We're currently doing quite a bit with reduction and inspections and fire marshal position. Which obviously could be better, and we would like to make it better, but that's where the money comes in. We need the financing to do that. We've recognized that we need to do that. That is an operational level. It's not a policy level. Once you want to say you will hire a fire marshal at the board level, which is fine, then we'd say, well, we're going to pay for it. But we're currently doing it. We need more money to do it better. And most everything in that report is gonna cost money. Those things that are in there that don't cost money, we're already either doing it or working on it. And I think if we focus our time on the finance is number one, and then pull in those things that are suggested to make things better that are gonna cost money, and focus on which priorities those should be, which a fire inspector position, I don't think we need a fire marshal. 'Cause that's more money, but more money towards a fire prevention position. And we could accomplish a lot there, so. It's always gonna keep coming back to money is the number one thing.
Well, speaking of which, so we have governance and funding options. Peter outlined these last time, the fire authority, you know, so it's either a status quo or modified. The Title 32 special district, the county managed ESGID. I previously was saying county-wide ESGID without sort of sort of fully understanding the impact of evergreen fire. Part of the provide service in part of the district, so county managed, I was told was better. Funding, so the fire authority, you'd have mill levies and potentially general fund. For funding, Title 32, that's SB 24/194, it may allow sales tax, but as Andy talked about before, it'll be a combination, it won't be all sales tax. And then the ESGID, a mill levy, county general fund, municipalities would pay the ESGID for fire services. The idea here is that we'd use some of the criteria outlined to objectively evaluate these governance and funding options. And I think, in how it relates to operations. So some of the next steps, for some of you who've been on the I-70 work, we use a matrix that we sort of look at, some of these topics, right? So we look at those options, status quo, modified fire authority, special district, ESGID. How do these options, and we're gonna start to fill this table out. And I'm gonna my plan was to distribute this to you in advance of next time. So you have a chance to kind of weigh in on kind of how you see it. We'll inform each other and create a common set of understanding about the options and how well these options meet, including some of the vision that you have here. And that's my proposal or my plan going forward, is that at our next meeting, we start to think about both these funding and governance, staffing options, or could be other categories like that they've had here, that Mission CIT's outlined. But that was the proposal. This is just an example of where my thought process was going to fulfill what I had heard, which is a objective evaluation of these alternatives. I don't want to, and I haven't heard from everybody, you want to move through this relatively quickly, right? You want to have the conversations, you want to have and be able to, kind of really think about this and consult with your other constituent groups. But, my thought is that we're not going to spend an inordinate amount of time kind of doing this. We're going to have the conversation. We're going to let you sit with it. We're going to try to figure out what kind of can work. And then you're going to need to, sort of to decide what you want to do. And so my thought is that we continue to meet every couple weeks. I'm talking to Brian, we wanted a calendar now about when the best meeting is next. But first, before we do calendaring, any thoughts or concerns with kind of what I'm proposing here?
I think that when you talk about a matrix like that in our transportation meetings, there are various stakeholders that come in with very different perspectives there, and it works well. And to do that and have a consensus model where we can arrive at something together is and hear every voice in the room. I know, with regard to your question about do we want to move fast, I think we'd all like to get through this and make whatever changes we do make. I think we can all agree that everything can become better. I can do better every day. I can look back on the day and say, well, I could have done that day better every day, And so we know we can improve. And I think we'd like to get through what those improvements are and get that closure that George talks about so that we have stakeholder trust in what we've arrived at. And getting there is just going to be messy because everybody has to have a voice and we got to get through those long conversations to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I honestly, I've been impressed with not only with last meeting, with this one, the quality of the input, it's interesting. There's some touchy things that and fair enough. I love the Clear Creek County leadership team ground rules too on the wall. Yeah, well done. So let's keep going. Calendar for next time, is that, so
we already.
Or we don't have a calendar. We don't have.
I don't think we have anything set.
Some
It's 2 weeks from now is May 9th.
Are we sticking with Thursday? Did we want to go back to Wednesday, Tuesday?
Better on my end.
Which day?
Wednesday.
Well, it depends on which Wednesday.
We have a lot of Wednesday conflicts.
Wednesday, the 8th?
I'm not sure if it matters, but that is the day of the EPA and
Oh, yeah.
environmental
Yeah.
health Superfund site public.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we should try and rival that.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. Like we can go, I think we're pretty unified on that one. We can go hassle them,
Thursday.
Thursday, the 9th won't work for me. My son is graduating from college that day.
Ooh,
Congrats.
Monday.
Congratulations.
there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
I know you said every 2 weeks.
Or
The week of the 13th would be a lot better for me because the last week of the session is the week of the 6th and the state's got some real big ideas about, interestingly, how much money local governments need to operate. And it's taken up a lot of my time.
week of the 13th, which day?
Not the 15th.
16th?
What about the 13th?
Well,
I think
Mondays
13th or
are
the
pretty good.
16th?
hang on.
Okay.
Wait a
Monday's
minute.
Idaho Springs.
Somebody said
Oh,
not the
okay. Oh,
13th.
not the,
I heard not the 13th, 14th, or 15th. Does that
Thursday-
leave
Thursday the
16 or
16th at
17?
6 PM?
Chuck, is that second Monday, do you guys meet?
You know, the 16th, I can say categorically would be good, for me. Andy, would you be all right on the 16th? Okay, so
That's a thumbs up.
that makes two of us.
Two looks to the right, one to the left. All right, here we go.
Okay.
So, Thursday, the 16th at 6 o'clock.
Invite.
Thank you. Great. Well, George, I think you had a letter that, so I'll put a cap on this and then you had a letter that you wanted to discuss from that build off of the assurance, to your child.
Yeah, thank you. I agree to this with the conversation about the way that this conversation is reasonably making staff feel. And I agreed to write a letter. And so this is what I drafted. I don't know how we want to proceed, if we want to try to approve this here, if we want to get our legislators to approve it. If you all want to redline it and we talk about it in a few weeks, I'm open to whatever. I hope that this reflects the conversation that we had with accuracy. I welcome corrections. Sorry.
thank you.
That was kind of rude today.
I'm not touching that remark.
My suggestion from a process standpoint, whether you want it or not, is just let people have a chance to review it and come back at it on the 16th. Is there more
Yeah,
urgency?
we shouldn't do this tonight.
Yes, no.
Getting it in your hands at 8 o'clock. Yeah, thanks George for doing this though. I'm not at all. Hand it to us.
So Sean and Andy will need,
Andy and Sean, I just emailed it to you.
Perfect.
so review it, and then come prepared next time for comments and adoption. Is that, unless there's some reason to do it sooner? I know that there's a question out there about what's happening, what's going on, and this is meant to be an assurance that, one, that they're valued and that their jobs are secure. If without having read it, was that accurate? Yeah.
Wait a minute, what are we adopting?
You're not adopting anything.
I thought that's what you said. I got lost. I'm sorry.
Approve the letter.
Oh, the letter. Okay, I'm with you now.
In my mind is like, just the way I wrote it is that like, this group says, yeah, we like it, and that's good enough. Alternatively, we could decide that to go to the, if we want it to be a little more formal, we could go to all 5 to ask them to approve it. I'm open to.
Okay,
George.
just got confused.
Chuck's giving George the thumbs up there.
Oh, yeah.
We'll give you a little bit more time. Chuck's a fast reader.
Well, I do, that's why I brought it up. I do worry about morale. I don't want anybody, this can absolutely help.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time tonight. We'll see you on the 16th. I think all of you have my contact information. If there's something that you want to kind of put on I'll try to put the agenda together in advance, but really impressed with your discussions. I'm glad that some of you felt like we were making some progress. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.